The holding chamber reeked of desperation and barely contained chaos. Captain Elena Vaz stood motionless among the 100 other species representatives, her eyes fixed on the small figure thrashing against the containment field in the center of the grand hall. The child, no more than 7 cycles old by human estimation, was Catherine, her scales flickering between deep violet and furious crimson as she screamed in a language that made the translation devices spark and fail. "Another volunteer requests removal from consideration," the arbitrator announced, its mechanical voice echoing through the crystalline chamber. That made 19. 19 delegations who had stepped forward with promises of cultural exchange and understanding, only to retreat when the child's telepathic waves hit them like hammers. Elena felt it too. Raw, unfiltered terror mixed with rage that tasted like copper on her tongue. The child's mind was a storm, and she was drowning everyone nearby in it. The Catherine Queen sat perfectly still on her obsidian throne, her own scales a muted gray that Elena had learned meant profound grief. 3 cycles. The child had been abandoned for 3 cycles, and no species in the Galactic Assembly could withstand her long enough to offer sanctuary. "The child will be transferred to Isolation Facility 793. The arbitrator continued. "Psychological decomposition is, no." The word left Elena's mouth before conscious thought caught up. Every head in the chamber turned toward her. The Queen's scales rippled, shifting to a shade Elena's implant couldn't translate. The arbitrator's sensors focused on her position. "Captain Voss of Terra. You wish to register an objection?" "I wish to volunteer." Elena stepped forward, breaking the formal line of representatives. Behind her, Ambassador Chen's hand twitched toward her arm but stopped. Protocol dictated he should pull her back. Protocol also dictated that humans observe, adapt, and never interfere in assembly custody matters. The child's screaming stopped. In the sudden silence, Elena heard her own heartbeat, felt the weight of 1,000 alien eyes. The girl's head turned, and for the first time since Elena had entered the chamber, those violet eyes focused with something other than blind panic. "Captain Voss." The Queen's voice was like wine through crystal chimes. "Your species has been assembly members for only 8 standard years. You understand the magnitude of what you propose?" "I do, Your Majesty." "You do not." The Queen rose, her scales now shifting to a deep amber. Elena's database tagged as challenge. 19 species with centuries of psychological expertise have failed. The child's telepathic trauma creates feedback loops that have hospitalized 7 caregivers. 2 remain in comas. You are aware of this? Yes. Then, you are either supremely arrogant or supremely ignorant. The Queen descended the throne steps, moving with predatory grace until she stood 3 meters from Elena. The child watched them both, her scales flickering uncertainly. "Explain your reasoning, human." Elena met the Queen's gaze steadily. In her peripheral vision, she tracked the dozen royal guards whose weapons had shifted to ready positions. "Your Majesty, I've read the reports. Every species that failed attempted to suppress or redirect the child's telepathic emanations. They tried to calm the storm. And you believe you can succeed where they failed?" "No, Your Majesty." "I don't intend to calm anything." Elena's voice remained level, conversational, despite the pressure building behind her eyes as the child's attention intensified on her. Human children traumatized by war, by loss, by abandonment, they don't need their pain suppressed. They need someone who can stand in the storm with them, and not break. Not fix them. Just stay. The Queen's scales flickered through 3 colors too quickly for Elena's implant to register. "You are telepathically null. Your species registers barely above baseline on psionic sensitivity scales." "Exactly." Understanding rippled across the Queen's features. "You cannot be drowned by what you cannot fully perceive. The child needs someone who won't flinch from her pain because it overwhelms them," Elena said. "She needs someone too stubborn or too limited to run away." The child made a sound, not a scream this time, but something smaller, questioning. Her scales shifted to a pale blue that Elena's implant tagged as cautious hope. The girl took 1 step toward Elena, then another. The containment field deactivated with a whisper of displaced energy. Every guard in the room tensed. The arbitrator's voice cut through the silence. Your Majesty, protocol requires. The Queen raised one clawed hand. Silence fell like a physical weight. The child stood now at the edge of what had been her cage, her eyes locked on Elena's face. Tears tracked down her scaled cheeks, and the telepathic pressure in the room built until Elena felt her teeth ache. Come here, Elena said softly, lowering herself to one knee. Not a command. An invitation. The child ran. Not away from Elena, but toward her, closing the distance in 3 desperate bounds. Small arms wrapped around Elena's neck with enough force to bruise, and the telepathic wave that crashed over the chamber sent half the delegates to their knees. Elena held on. Her vision grayed at the edges. Blood vessels burst in her eyes from the pressure. Every instinct screamed at her to let go, to protect herself, to run like the others had run. She tightened her grip instead, one hand on the child's back, feeling the frantic flutter of 2 hearts beating against her chest. I've got you, she whispered. I've got you, and I'm not letting go. The child's screams became sobs. The telepathic assault became a plea. And Elena, stubborn and limited and telepathically null, held a broken child while an empire watched, and wondered if humanity's greatest strength was simply the inability to know when something should be impossible. The Queen's scales shifted to gold. The days that followed tested every assumption Elena had made about her own resilience. The child, Siren, her name was Siren, did not sleep for the first 43 hours. She clung to Elena with desperate strength, her telepathic emissions cycling through terror and rage and grief so profound that Elena began seeing colors that shouldn't exist. The medical team assigned to monitor them changed shifts every 4 hours, unable to withstand longer exposure. Elena didn't have that luxury. Her implant recorded the gradual degradation of her neural pathways as Siren's uncontrolled broadcasts carved furrows through her mind. By the 2nd day, she'd lost the ability to taste anything except salt. By the 3rd, she started forgetting the names of objects she'd known her entire life. The word for the drinking container eluded her for 20 minutes before her linguistic centers rebooted and returned cup to her vocabulary. You're experiencing severe psychic backlash, Dr. Zalen informed her on the 4th day, his insected features arranged in what the translation matrix called concern. Your consciousness is fragmenting at the edges to accommodate the overflow of her emissions. If this continues, it will continue, Elena said, her voice hoarse from singing lullabies Siren couldn't hear but seemed to feel through the vibrations of Elena's chest. How long can I last? Dr. Zalen's antennae drooped. At this rate of deterioration? Perhaps another week before permanent damage becomes irreversible. Siren stirred against Elena's shoulder, scales shifting through anxious purples. Elena adjusted her grip, started humming again. Then we'd better make progress quickly. But progress was a concept that seemed to exist in a different universe. Siren spoke only in telepathic bursts that left Elena's nose bleeding and her hands shaking. The child ate only when Elena ate first, demonstrating that the food wasn't poisoned or drugged. She startled at every sound, every movement, her scales flashing warning crimsons that preceded telepathic strikes powerful enough to crack the reinforced glass of the observation chamber. On the 5th day, the Queen visited. She entered without ceremony, her guards remaining outside the reinforced doors. Siren's reaction was immediate and visceral, a telepathic shriek that dropped Elena to her knees and sent the Queen staggering backward, scales flashing through protective blacks and defensive grays. Enough. The Queen's voice carried harmonics that bypassed ears and vibrated directly in Elena's bones. Siren's assault faltered, weakened by confusion. I am not here to take you back, child. I am here to understand why you reject your own people but accept this fragile alien. Siren buried her face in Elena's shoulder. The telepathic pressure didn't cease, but it changed, became less focused assault and more ambient desperation. Elena forced herself upright, one arm wrapped protectively around the child. Your Majesty, she managed, tasting copper. With respect, she doesn't reject her people. She rejects abandonment. I did not abandon her. The Queen's scales shifted to colors Elena had never seen before, deep, swirling combinations that her damaged linguistic centers couldn't begin to categorize. Siren is my sister-daughter, born of my mother's final clutch. When the genetic cascade began, when her telepathy manifested without control or filter, I exhausted every resource in the Empire trying to help her. 19 species. 47 specialists. 3 cycles of desperate searching for anyone who could teach her to shield, to control, to survive in a universe that cannot tolerate her unfiltered presence. The Queen moved closer, and Siren flinched but didn't attack. I brought her here because the Assembly represents thousands of species, millions of years of collective knowledge. I thought surely someone, somewhere, would have the key to helping her. Instead, I watched 19 more failures. Watched my sister-daughter be labeled untamable. Watched the arbitrator schedule her for isolation and psychological decomposition, which is a pleasant phrase for letting her scream herself to death in a cell where she can't hurt anyone. The Queen's voice cracked on the last word. Tell me, human, how is that not abandonment? Elena met the Queen's eyes. Blood ran from her nose, dripped onto Siren's scales. Because you're still here. Because you haven't looked away. Abandonment isn't about the physical distance, Your Majesty. It's about giving up. And you haven't done that. Haven't I? The Queen's scales went gray again, that profound grief. I signed the transfer order. And then, a stubborn human volunteered and you let her try. Elena adjusted Siren in her arms, felt the child's double heartbeat against her own singular rhythm. You're still fighting for her. You're just fighting in the only way you have left. The Queen was silent for a long moment. Then, she did something Elena had never seen in any of the cultural briefings. She lowered herself to the ground, folding her legs in a posture that put her head level with Siren's. Sister-daughter, she said softly. Can you hear me beneath the storm? Siren's grip on Elena tightened. A whimper escaped her throat, actual sound rather than telepathic noise. I know you're frightened. I know the world is too loud, too bright, too much. I know every mind you touch burns you, and you burn them in return. The Queen's voice held centuries of patience, of love worn smooth by grief. But this human doesn't burn the same way, does she? Siren turned her head slightly, enough to peek at the Queen with one violet eye. She's different, the Queen continued. Limited, as she said. Not enough psionic sensitivity to be consumed by your pain. Just enough to feel it, to know it's real, but not enough to run from it. She paused. I cannot be what you need, sister-daughter. My telepathy is too strong. Being near you is like standing in a fusion reactor. I feel everything you feel magnified 1,000-fold. It took me 3 cycles to accept that my love for you isn't enough to overcome basic biology. Elena felt something shift in Siren's posture. The telepathic pressure in the room changed frequencies, became questioning rather than defensive. But perhaps, the Queen said, scales shifting to that cautious hope blue. A species that barely registers on psionic scales, that can't be overwhelmed by what they can't fully perceive. Perhaps they can teach you what we cannot. Not how to suppress what you are, but how to exist as yourself in a universe that wasn't built for your intensity. Siren made a sound, a chirp that the translation matrix rendered as a question mark. Her small hand reached out, stopped centimeters from the Queen's scaled face, trembling with the effort of control. The Queen held perfectly still. I'm here, sister-daughter. I've always been here. I just couldn't come close without hurting us both. The touch, when it came, lasted less than a second before Siren yanked her hand back with a cry of pain and the Queen's scales flashed protective black. But it had happened. Contact. Communication. A bridge across an impossible distance. Elena's vision was graying again, her neural pathways screaming protest at the emotional intensity flooding through Siren's unshielded consciousness. She felt Dr. Zaylen's concerned presence at the observation window, saw the medical team preparing intervention protocols. 48 hours, her damaged mind whispered. Maybe less now. The cost of standing in the storm. But storms eventually exhausted themselves. Elena had to believe that. Had to believe that beneath the chaos was a child who could learn, who could grow, who could find a way to exist without destroying herself, and everyone around her. She'd made a promise. She intended to keep it. Even if it killed her. The breakthrough came on the 7th day, when Elena's cognitive deterioration reached critical levels and she started forgetting Siren's name between heartbeats. She'd named the child 16 different names in the space of an hour: Kira, Seelen, Maya, River, grasping at syllables that felt right even as her memory centers misfired and rewired themselves around the telepathic damage. Dr. Zalen had been adamant. "Captain, your neural architecture is collapsing. Another day of this exposure and the damage becomes permanent. You'll lose language, spatial reasoning, memory formation. You'll lose yourself. Then we'd better work fast." Elena had replied, words slurring as her language processing stuttered. She sat on the floor of the containment chamber, Siren in her lap, and began the exercise that Ambassador Chen had suggested during his brief, painful visit that morning. He'd lasted 4 minutes in Siren's presence before his nose started bleeding and he had to retreat, but he'd left Elena with an idea drawn from human psychology, from the treatment of traumatized children who couldn't verbalize their pain. "We're going to play a game," Elena told Siren, her voice steady despite the fact that she'd temporarily forgotten the word for game, and had to route around it with activity for learning. "I'm going to show you what I'm feeling, and you're going to try to turn down your own feelings just a little bit. Just enough to feel mine underneath yours." Siren's scales rippled skeptically. The telepathic pressure didn't change. Like this. Elena closed her eyes, focused on a single memory: her daughter Sarah, 5 years old, laughing in summer rain. She held that memory, that feeling of pure joy, and pushed it to the surface of her consciousness where Siren's telepathy would catch it. The child went very still. The pressure in the room shifted, no longer just broadcasting pain but seeking, questioning, trying to understand this new stimulus. Elena felt Siren's telepathic presence brush against the memory, felt the child's confusion at encountering someone else's emotion instead of just her own reflected back. "That's mine," Elena whispered. "That's what I feel when I remember someone I love. Now you try. Show me something you feel, but quieter. Like you're whispering instead of shouting." The attempt was catastrophic. Siren's telepathic output spiked so violently that the containment field nearly failed. Elena's vision went white, then red, then dark. She felt blood vessels burst in her brain, felt her consciousness starting to fracture beyond Dr. Zalen's ability to repair. "Worth it," she thought distantly. "We tried." That's more than she had before. Then the pressure dropped. Not gradually, but in a sudden, shocking decrease that left Elena gasping on the floor, Siren sobbing in her arms. The child's telepathy hadn't disappeared. It still pressed against Elena's mind like a heavy blanket, but for the first time in 7 days, it wasn't actively trying to kill her. "You did it," Elena managed, her words thick and clumsy. Quieter. You made it quieter." Siren was shaking, scales cycling rapidly through colors that suggested exhaustion and fear and something that might have been pride. "Hurt you?" she said, actual words in a voice like breaking glass. "Always hurt." "Not always." Elena pulled the child closer, felt her own heartbeat starting to steady as her brain began the desperate process of healing what it could. "You're learning. That's what matters. You're learning control." The door opened. The Queen entered, moving faster than protocol allowed, her scales bright gold with hope. "The readings, Dr. Zalen showed me the readings. She decreased output by 43%. 43% in a single attempt. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, Elena said, still not entirely sure which words were real and which were her damaged brain's best guesses. 10 seconds is infinity compared to 0. The Queen knelt beside them, maintaining careful distance but close enough that Siren could see her clearly. "Sister-daughter, do you understand what you just did? You controlled your telepathy. For the first time in your life, you controlled it. Siren's response was a telepathic burst that sent both Elena and the Queen reeling, but underneath the pain was something else, a desperate question that Elena's fragmenting consciousness interpreted as why. Because you had a reason to, Elena said softly. Because hurting me made you sad. Because you wanted to try. She touched Siren's scaled cheek gently. Because you're not untamable. You're just young. And scared. And learning. The Queen's scales shifted through a dozen colors before settling on deep blue, determination mixed with cautious hope. Captain Voss, I must ask something that protocol forbids but circumstances demand. Your neural damage is severe. Dr. Zalen estimates you have perhaps 3 more days before you lose critical cognitive functions permanently. I cannot ask you to sacrifice yourself for my sister-daughter, no matter how much progress we've seen. Elena laughed, which came out as more of a wheeze. Your Majesty, I'm a military officer from a species that's been fighting its own extinction for longer than we've had written language. We're very good at sacrificing ourselves for things that matter. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. Elena met the Queen's eyes steadily. 3 more days. We can do a lot in 3 days. They did. By the end of day 8, Siren could maintain reduced telepathic output for 30-second intervals. By day 9, a full minute. Dr. Zalen stopped predicting Elena's cognitive collapse and started documenting what he called impossible neuroplastic adaptation. Elena's brain was rewiring itself around the damage faster than any known species' capability, forming new pathways even as old ones dissolved. Humans are persistence hunters. Ambassador Chen explained to the assembled scientific team on the 10th day, watching through reinforced glass as Elena taught Siren to count using telepathic pulses instead of words. We evolved to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion, to survive injuries that would kill other species, to adapt to environments that should have destroyed us. Captain Voss isn't doing anything her ancestors didn't do when they walked out of Africa and conquered a planet that was actively trying to kill them. She's dying, Dr. Zalen pointed out. Slowly, yes, and slower than predicted, but her baseline neural function has decreased by 37%. And Siren's uncontrolled telepathic output has decreased by 62%. The Queen countered. She hadn't left the observation room in 3 days, watching every interaction, documenting every moment of progress. If the trend continues, Captain Voss will have perhaps 40% of her original cognitive capacity when Siren finally achieves full control. Dr. Zalen interrupted. Language impairment, memory loss, reduced spatial reasoning. She'll be a fraction of who she was. Elena, inside the chamber, looked up at the observation window as if she'd heard them despite the soundproofing. She smiled, touched Siren's head gently, and returned to the counting exercise. 1 pulse, 2 pulses, 3. Siren's telepathy following the rhythm, learning pattern and control. She knows, Ambassador Chen said quietly. She's always known. And she's choosing this anyway. The Queen's scales shifted to gold again, bright and unwavering. Then, we honor that choice by ensuring it succeeds. On day 12, Siren spoke her first voluntary sentence. Elena, stay with me. Not telepathy, but actual words in a voice that no longer sounded like breaking glass. On day 13, she managed 5 full minutes of controlled output, her telepathy present but gentle, a touch instead of a hammer. On day 14, Elena forgot her daughter's name for 3 hours before her rebuilt neural pathways found it again. She didn't tell anyone. There wasn't time for grief. On day 15, Siren asked, "Why you help me?" in a voice that held genuine curiosity rather than trauma. Elena, sitting on the floor with the child in her lap, her own thoughts moving like honey through damaged synapses, answered carefully. Because everyone deserves someone who stays. Because you're worth the cost. Because I'm too stubborn to quit. She paused, searching for words in a vocabulary that was now more holes than substance. Because you're not a problem to fix. You're a person to know. Siren was quiet for a long moment. Then, her telepathy brushed against Elena's mind, gentle as a breath. and Elena felt what the child was trying to communicate: gratitude, affection, and a determination that mirrored her own. The scales on Siren's arms shifted to gold. Just like the Queen's. The 17th day marked what Dr. Zalen called the inflection point. Elena's neural damage had stopped progressing. Not reversed, not healed, but stopped. Her brain had adapted to Siren's presence, learned to route around the damage, build new architectures that could withstand the child's telepathic output. She would never be who she was before. Language came slowly now, memory was fragmentary, mathematics was gone entirely, but she was stable. And Siren could maintain controlled telepathy for hours at a time. The Queen visited on the 18th day, entering the containment chamber for the first time since that initial breakthrough. Siren didn't flinch, didn't attack. Instead, she slid from Elena's lap and approached her sister-mother with careful, deliberate steps. The telepathic pressure in the room rose but stayed within tolerable limits. "I-learning," Siren said, her grammar still developing but her voice clear and strong. "Elena teaching me to be gentle." "I see that, sister-daughter." The Queen knelt, her scales shifting through proud golds and relieved blues. "You've accomplished in 18 days what specialists said was impossible. You should be very proud." Siren's scales flickered uncertainly. "Elena hurt for me. Gave up thinking parts for me." She looked back at Elena, who was struggling to remember the word for the chair she was sitting in. "That fair?" The Queen followed her gaze, and for a moment, her scales went gray again, that profound grief. "No, child. It's not fair. But fairness is not a law of the universe. Sometimes people sacrifice more than they should for people they love. The question is what you do with that sacrifice. Make worth it," Siren said firmly, scales flashing determined gold. "Learn all Elena teaching. Be good with telepathy. Make her hurting mean something." "Exactly." The Queen rose, moved to stand beside Elena. "Captain Voss, the Assembly has reached a decision regarding Siren's custody. Given your unique success in helping her achieve control, they've granted humanity provisional custody, with you as her primary guardian. You'll have full access to Assembly medical and educational resources, but the responsibility for her continued development rests with you and your species." She paused. "There will be conditions, assessments, regular reports to ensure her progress continues. Are you willing to accept this responsibility in your current condition?" Elena's answer came slowly, each word requiring conscious effort to locate in her rewired brain. "Yes. Accept. We'll teach her. She's good child. Strong child. Just needs time and patience. Chair," she added after a moment, pleased with herself for finding the word. "Sitting in chair." The Queen's scales shifted through several colors too quickly to read, but her voice was warm. "You've given my sister-daughter a future, Captain Voss. You've given her a chance to be more than her trauma. Humanity may be limited in psionic sensitivity, but you've demonstrated that sometimes limitations are precisely what's needed. The Assembly is reconsidering several assumptions about strength and capability." Siren returned to Elena's side, not the desperate clinging of before, but a comfortable closeness. "We go Earth now?" she asked hopefully. "See Elena's home?" "Soon," Elena promised, touching the child's head gently. "First, more learning. More practice. Make sure you're ready for all the people and noise and things." She'd forgotten the word for stimulation but pushed forward anyway. "Earth is loud. Need to be sure you can handle loud." "I can handle," Siren insisted, scales flashing confident purple. "I handled you, and you very stubborn?" Elena laughed, which still worked even if vocabulary sometimes didn't. "Yes. Very stubborn. It's genetic. You'll fit right in." The Queen watched them, her scales settling into soft gold that held, steady as sunrise. Later, she would tell the Assembly that humanity's greatest gift wasn't their technology, or their military prowess, or even their remarkable adaptability. It was their capacity to look at something everyone else had declared impossible and respond with simple, implacable stubbornness, Watch me. On day 23, Siren maintained controlled telepathic output for 12 consecutive hours. On day 28, she learned to shield completely for short periods, creating a bubble of silence around her mind that felt like peace. On day 30, she asked Elena to teach her about human children, about Sarah, about the daughter Elena had left behind to spend a year on the assembly station. Elena's memories of Sarah were fractured now, puzzle pieces with gaps between them, but she shared what she could. She's 10. Likes things with numbers. Smart. Stubborn like me. Scared when I left but trying to be brave. The words came easier now, her brain finding new pathways for language even if the old ones were gone. She'll like you. You're both fierce. I'm scared to meet her, Siren admitted, scales shifting to anxious purples. What if I hurt her? What if I lose control and hurt someone you love? Then we fix it and try again, Elena said simply. That's what learning is. Mistakes and trying again. She pulled Siren close, felt the child's double heartbeat, steady and strong. You're not the same child who couldn't control her telepathy. You're not the child everyone said was untamable. You're Siren, who worked harder than anyone I've ever met to learn something everyone said was impossible. Sarah will see that. Everyone will see that. The Queen, listening from the observation room, found herself agreeing. The child who had been screaming in that containment field 5 weeks ago was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more aware, more herself. The human who had stepped forward when no one else would was changed too, diminished in some ways, transformed in others, but still fundamentally Elena, still stubborn, still standing. On day 35, Dr. Zaylan cleared them both for departure from medical observation. On day 36, the Queen held a private ceremony in the royal chambers, formally releasing Siren to Elena's custody with blessings and promises to visit. On day 37, Elena and Siren boarded a human transport ship bound for Earth, carrying between them a datapad full of exercises, a medical file 300 pages long, and hope. Ambassador Chen met them at the airlock. Captain Voss, welcome aboard. Siren, it's good to finally meet you properly. He glanced at Elena, noting the way she paused before responding, the careful deliberation of each word. How are you feeling? Alive, Elena said, smiling. Different but alive. Learning new ways to think. It's interesting. She touched Siren's shoulder gently. How's Sarah? Excited. Nervous. She's been learning about Kethran culture and practicing the greeting gestures. Chen led them down the corridor toward the residential quarters. The crew's been briefed on Siren's condition and her progress. Everyone's prepared to give her space if she needs it, but they're also curious. First Kethran child on a human ship. Siren's scales flickered through uncertain colors. Her telepathy was carefully controlled, a gentle background presence rather than an assault, but Elena felt her anxiety rising. It's okay, she murmured. Remember what we practiced. When it gets too much, you tell me. We take breaks. No one expects perfection. What if I disappoint them? Siren whispered. Impossible, Elena said firmly. You're already extraordinary. Anything else is bonus. They reached the quarters assigned to them, 2 adjoining rooms with a shared common space, reinforced walls for extra psionic shielding, and windows that looked out at the stars. Siren pressed her face to the glass, scales shifting to wonderstruck blues and greens. So many stars. So many places. Someday you'll see them all. Elena promised. But first, we get you settled. Help you learn to be around humans without feeling overwhelmed. Small steps. The door chimed. Elena felt Siren tense, felt the child's telepathy spike briefly before she controlled it. It's okay, she said gently. That's probably Sarah. You remember my daughter. She wants to meet you. What if I hurt her? Siren's voice was very small. Then I will help you stop, and we'll try again tomorrow. Elena said, the words coming from some deep well of patience that her damaged brain couldn't locate the source of but knew was essential. But I don't think you will. You've worked too hard to lose control now. She opened the door. Sarah stood in the corridor, 11 years old and trying to look calm despite the excitement blazing in her eyes. She wore a formal jacket, hair carefully braided, hands clasped in front of her in a Catherine gesture of peaceful greeting that was slightly wrong but earnestly attempted. "Hello," she said carefully, speaking slowly and clearly the way Chen had obviously coached her. "I'm Sarah Voss. It's an honor to meet you, Siren." Siren stared at her, scales cycling through colors too quickly to track. Her telepathy brushed against Sarah's mind. Elena felt it, felt the child's desperate need to understand this person who mattered to Elena, and Sarah flinched but held her ground. "You feel like Elena," Siren said wonderingly. Same stubbornness. Same brave scared feeling." Sarah blinked. "I'm not telepathic." "How can you feel that?" "You are a little bit telepathic," Siren corrected, stepping closer. "All humans are, just very quiet. Like whispers instead of talking. But you there. I feel you." She paused, scales shifting to uncertain purple. "I'm sorry I scare you. I try to be gentle." "You didn't scare me." Sarah lied, then reconsidered. "Okay, maybe a little. But that's okay. Mom said you've been working really hard to learn control. She said you're the bravest person she's ever met." Siren looked at Elena, who nodded confirmation even though she didn't remember saying exactly that. Her memory was unreliable now, but the sentiment felt true. "You want to see my room?" Sarah asked, shifting from formal to casual with the easy adaptability of children. "I have some games Mom said you might like. They're about patterns and colors. And I've been learning about Catherine music, and I found some recordings that are supposed to be really beautiful." Siren's scales shifted to hopeful blue. "You want to be friends with me?" "Obviously," Sarah said, as if this were the most natural thing in the universe. "You're going to be living with us. We should be friends." She paused. "Also, Mom gave up a lot to help you. That means you're family now. And I take care of family." Elena felt something crack open in her chest. Pride or love or gratitude, she couldn't quite remember which emotion was which anymore, but it felt warm and right. "Go," she told Siren gently. "I'll be here if you need me. But I think you'll be okay." Siren hesitated, then took Sarah's offered hand. The two children headed down the corridor together, Sarah chattering about the ship and the games and what Earth was like, Siren listening intently with scales that slowly, steadily, shifted to gold. Ambassador Chen watched them go, then turned to Elena. "You did something impossible, Captain. The whole assembly is talking about it. 19 species failed, but 1 human succeeded." "I didn't succeed," Elena corrected, leaning against the doorframe as exhaustion caught up with her. Words were getting harder again. They always did when she was tired. "We succeeded. Siren did the hard part. All I did was refuse to quit. Sometimes that's the most important part," Chen said quietly. "The Queen wants to establish an exchange program. Human guardians for Catherine children with telepathic control issues. She thinks your species might be uniquely suited to help where others can't." Elena considered this, her thoughts moving slowly through her rewired neural architecture. "Need protocols. Training. Support structures. Can't expect everyone to sacrifice what I sacrificed." She met Chen's eyes. "But yes. If there are more children like Siren, if they need someone who won't run from the storm, then we help. That's what humans do." "That's what you do," Chen corrected gently. "No," Elena said, and despite the damage, despite the gaps in her memory and the words she'd never fully recover, her voice was certain. "That's what we do. Humans are persistence hunters. We don't give up. We don't quit. We see something impossible, and we try anyway." She smiled, watching the corridor where 2 children, 1 human, 1 Catherine, had disappeared around a corner, already laughing together. "We see someone who needs help, and we step forward. Every single time." Chen was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "I'll draft the proposal for the exchange program. We'll need volunteers, specialists, medical support. It'll take time to build properly. Good, Elena said. Do it right. Make sure no one else has to pay what I paid. She touched her temple absently, feeling the phantom ache of neural pathways that no longer existed. But make sure they understand, sometimes the cost is worth it. Sometimes you meet someone worth everything. 3 days later, the transport ship broke orbit around Earth. Siren stood at the observation window, Sarah beside her, both children staring down at the blue-green sphere that would be Siren's new home. The Catherine child's scales shifted through every color in her repertoire, fear and hope and wonder and determination all mixed together. Elena stood behind them, one hand on each child's shoulder, and felt Siren's telepathy brush against her mind. Not an assault this time, not even a question, but a statement: thank you. For staying. For not leaving. For being too stubborn to give up on me. Elena didn't have the words to respond. They'd slipped away again, lost in the gaps her sacrifice had created, but she squeezed Siren's shoulder gently, and the child understood. Some conversations happen beyond language, in the spaces between heartbeats, in the choice to stand in the storm and hold on. The Queen, watching from her throne room light years away, received the report of their safe arrival and, finally, allowed her scales to settle into peaceful gold. Her sister-daughter had a future. Humanity had proven that limitations could be strengths, that sometimes the inability to fully perceive pain was exactly what allowed someone to bear it. And across the galaxy, 19 species that had failed began reconsidering their assumptions about what was possible. In the end, the story of the untamable alien girl and the human who stepped forward became legend. They told it in assembly halls and human academies, in Catherine nurseries and diplomatic briefings. They told it as a reminder that sometimes the most profound strengths come from the most unexpected sources, that stubbornness can be wisdom, that refusing to accept impossible can change the universe. But for Elena and Siren, it wasn't a legend. It was just Tuesday, and there were lessons to practice, games to play, a new world to explore. Siren's telepathy would always be powerful, and Elena's mind would always carry the scars of their early days together, but they had something more important than perfection. They had each other. They had Sarah and Chen and a whole ship full of humans who'd learned that sometimes family meant choosing to stay when everyone else left. They had a future that everyone had said was impossible, built one stubborn day at a time by a child who'd learned to control the storm and a woman who'd taught her by standing in it. And they had hope, that most human of qualities, the refusal to accept that anything is truly untamable if you're willing to pay the cost of patience, love, and the simple declaration, I'm not leaving. I'm staying right here. Watch me. The stars turned overhead. Earth waited below. And in a quiet moment between lessons and laughter, Siren's scales flashed brilliant gold as she took her first breath of home.